gap between the heavy metal stall door and the frame is only about half an inch wide. Normally, it's nothing, a design flaw. But when the warehouse lights are humming their dead fluorescent hum and you are entirely alone, that half inch is a window. And right now, that window is completely blocked by the bloodshot rim of a single, unblinking eye pressed perfectly flush against the metal crack. The syllables bleeding through the door don't make sense. They are disjointed, frantic, and wet. The air in the stall plummets 10 degrees. The metallic tang of adrenaline pools under my tongue. My lungs simply forget how to pull in oxygen. But I shouldn't start there. To understand why a locked door felt like a death trap, we have to go back a few hours. That was a Thursday, July 9th, 2015. I was drowning in university loans, working a second job doing the overnight stock shift at a massive, sprawling big-box retail store. The hours were brutal, usually midnight to 7 in the morning. No customers, no bright promotional music, just vast, hollow aisles and towering shelves stretching into the shadows. There were only 3 of us in a building the size of 2 football fields: myself, Marcus, and Elias. We all clocked in together, all wearing the same navy blue staff polos. At 2 a.m., I was pulling pallets in the electronics department. Have you ever noticed how loud a building gets when it's supposed to be empty? You hear the pipes shuddering, the refrigeration units cycling. I was scanning barcodes when a movement caught the periphery of my vision. At the far end of the aisle, a man stepped out from the main action alley. He was dressed in a crisp, dark polo and dark slacks, holding a small clipboard. My chest tightened for a fraction of a second, but then I recognized the posture. He looked exactly like one of the regional loss prevention auditors. Corporate guys who occasionally did unannounced overnight safety walks to keep us on our toes. I stood up straight and made eye contact. He didn't scowl. He didn't look suspicious. He just offered a slow, polite, professional nod, an acknowledgement between 2 people working the graveyard shift. My shoulders dropped. The tension drained out of my neck. I nodded back and turned my attention to the pallet. Just management doing the rounds. But when I glanced back down the aisle 10 seconds later, the space was entirely empty. And something else was wrong. The ventilation system above me pushed a slow draft down the aisle, carrying a smell that didn't belong in a sanitized retail store. It smelled like damp, freshly turned earth and old copper. A heavy chill settled at the base of my neck. The sound echoed off the high warehouse ceiling, coming from the grocery section. Marcus and Elias were supposed to be over there, but the rhythm of the wheels sounded erratic, jerky. I needed to use the restroom, but my stomach was tied in a knot. I told myself I would finish the electronics freight first. 3 minutes later, the silence shattered. The noise violently tore through the store, echoing from the sporting goods section a few aisles over. It was the sound of heavy metal striking the polished linoleum. My jaw clamped shut. I dropped my scanner and walked briskly toward the sound, the rubber of my sneakers squeaking far too loudly. When I rounded the corner, I found a heavy mountain bike lying sideways on the floor. I looked up. The steel display hook it had been hanging from was perfectly intact and securely fastened to the wall. The bike hadn't slipped. Gravity hadn't failed. Someone would have had to grab the frame with both hands, lift it upward, and aggressively hurl it to the ground. The air in the aisle felt thick, stagnant. I picked up the bike, my hands trembling slightly against the cold handlebars, and forced it back onto the hook. The damp earth smell was stronger here. I kept walking, moving toward the very back of the store, the paper and cleaning supplies aisles. The darkest part of the building, where the overhead lights were set to motion sensors that always triggered a second too late. I stopped at the end of aisle 14. It came from the next aisle over. It was a sound that attempted to mimic a human laugh, but it possessed no warmth. It was hollow, mechanical. The hairs on my arms stood on end. My throat felt like sandpaper. I took 3 quiet steps, leaning just enough to peer around the metal shelving. He was standing there, the auditor in the dark polo. But he wasn't holding a clipboard anymore. He was standing with his back to me, perfectly rigid, his arms hanging lifelessly at his sides. Slowly, without moving his shoulders, his head swiveled sideways. It turned to an impossible, unnatural angle. I could only see the jagged profile of his jaw and one wide, unblinking eye staring directly at the wall shelves. He knew I was there. Before I could pull my head back, he bolted. He didn't run toward me. He sprinted down the opposite end of the aisle, plunging into the shadows of the warehouse doors. I didn't give chase. The primal instinct in my guts screamed at me to find the others. I power-walked through the store, the silence pressing against my eardrums, until I found Marcus breaking down boxes in the women's apparel section. I approached him quickly, keeping my voice low. I told him someone was in the building, someone who wasn't supposed to be here, dressed in black, acting completely erratic. Marcus didn't even stop breaking down his cardboard. He sighed, shaking his head. "You're sleep-deprived, man. You're working too many hours." I told him I saw the guy. I heard the crash. "It's just the building settling," Marcus said, his tone dripping with exhausted condescension. "The AC does weird things to the acoustics in here. The doors are locked. We're the only ones inside. Just drink some water and calm down." He dismissed it so casually, with such absolute authority that for a fleeting second I questioned my own sanity. Was I just seeing shadows? But the icy grip on my lungs hadn't loosened. I told him to at least warn Elias if he saw him, and I quickly walked away. The pressure in my bladder was unbearable now. I couldn't wait any longer. I headed straight for the employee-only bathrooms located deep inside the back warehouse receiving area. It was the most isolated room in the entire building. I pushed through the heavy wooden door, the harsh fluorescent lights flickering above the cheap tile. I walked into the furthest stall, built a thick barrier of toilet paper over the seat, and sat down, staring blankly at the metal door of the stall. Then, the main bathroom door opened. The heavy door slowly swung shut, clicking into the frame. My breath hitched. "Marcus?" I asked, my voice cracking in the empty, tiled room. Nothing. Just the suffocating, heavy silence of someone holding their breath. A shadow slowly eclipsed the sliver of light beneath the stall door. 2 dark shoes stepped silently into view. They stopped inches from the metal barrier. The person stepped closer, pressing their entire body against the stall. The thin, vertical crack of light between the door and the frame went pitch black. And then, the eye appeared, staring through the crack, unblinking, bloodshot. The unintelligible, wet whispering began. It bounced off the porcelain and tile, wrapping around my head. It didn't sound like words. It sounded like someone trying to remember how to speak. My hands shook violently as I fumbled in my pocket. I pulled out my phone. I had Marcus's number saved from a shift swap a month prior. I dialed. The phone rang twice before he picked up. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I raised my voice, the sound booming in the small room. I demanded he get to the warehouse bathroom immediately. I told him I was trapped. I kept my eyes locked on the crack in the door. The whispering stopped. The eye widened. Then, the shadow violently ripped away from the metal. The main bathroom door slammed open, and the footsteps faded rapidly into the cavernous warehouse. I sat there, paralyzed, the phone pressed against my ear, listening to the static hum of the line. 30 seconds later, the bathroom door swung open again. "Hey," Marcus's voice called out, annoyed and out of breath. "I'm here. There's nobody in the hall." I stumbled out of the stall. We searched the immediate warehouse area. Empty. There were no overnight security guards on duty. We had no access to the camera room. We were completely on our own. I refused to leave Marcus's side for the remaining 4 hours of the shift. I stocked whatever aisle he was in. Every shadow looked like a dark polo shirt. Every draft of air smelled like copper. When the morning manager finally unlocked the front doors at 7 a.m., I walked out into the blinding daylight and didn't look back. I sat in my car and immediately texted the store manager, detailing everything down to the minute. The man, the bike, the bathroom. I drove home, locked every door in my apartment, and collapsed into an exhausted, dreamless sleep. I woke up at 3 p.m. My phone screen was glowing on the nightstand. One new message from the store manager. I opened it. My blood ran completely cold. The manager believed me. He had gone straight into the security office to pull the tapes and trace the man's path through the store. But there was no footage. From 1 a.m. until 4 a.m., every single camera in the building, across all departments, had stopped recording. The system hadn't been turned off. The wires hadn't been cut. For 3 hours, every screen in the security room had broadcasted nothing but dead, gray static. There was no proof of a break-in, no proof of a trespasser. Just the lingering smell of damp earth and the memory of an eye watching me in the dark. If you enjoyed this story, a like is always appreciated. What would you have done in their place? Subscribe for more stories from the dark.